Brittany was once a proud and independent duchy, fiercely protective of its culture and autonomy. But in 1343, tragedy struck when Jeanne de Clisson's beloved husband, Olivier, was arrested on false charges of treason by the very French king they had supported and publicly executed. His severed head was displayed on the city gates of Nantes as a cruel warning to all who dared oppose the crown. For Jeanne, this horrific act not only represented a loss, but also a betrayal that sparked a fierce desire for vengeance. With nothing left to lose, she sold her lands, castles, and jewels to raise an army. At 43 years old, she shed the life of a noblewoman to become a warrior, the Lioness of Brittany, leading a brutal campaign against the French forces responsible for her husband's death. Jeanne's story is one of defiance, courage, and unyielding rage. A woman who broke medieval conventions, fought the most powerful men of her era, and carved her name into history as a legendary pirate and avenger. Beloved of Brittany, Jeanne de Clisson was born in 1300. She came into the world affluent and attended a prestigious school for nobility. At age 12, she was already engaged to Geoffrey de Chateaubriand, a nobleman 19 years old whose betrothal to her had been arranged by her parents. Unsurprisingly, their union was political in nature. Jeanne and Geoffrey had 2 children before tragedy struck. Her young husband died early. Living alone as a widow was nearly impossible for a 16-year-old Jeanne. Shortly thereafter, Jeanne married Olivier de Clisson, another wealthy nobleman from Brittany. Like her first marriage, this union was arranged. But after the ceremony, they fell deeply in love and lived a wonderful life together. They had 5 children and were well known in the noble circles of Brittany. During her first 4 decades, Jeanne did not leave a lasting impact. As a typical noblewoman, she was fortunate to wed her beloved and lead a peaceful, contented life on their opulent estate, supporting her husband, caring for their children, running the household, watching her family grow, and hoping to spend old age with her spouse were the central tenets of Jeanne's existence, as for countless other women in the Middle Ages. Unfortunately, Olivier's noble responsibilities soon dragged Jeanne into the upheaval engulfing Brittany in the early 1330s. France and England went to war after the Duke of Brittany died without a legitimate heir. This conflict is known as the War of the Breton Succession. The aristocracy of Brittany began arming themselves and choosing sides. Nobility was expected to fight on horseback, and choosing an allegiance demanded thoughtful deliberation. After considering their options, Olivier and Jeanne decided to support King Philip VI of France. Their choice was largely based on the strong relationship between the Clisson family and the House of Blois, which the French king backed. A sorrowful farewell followed Olivier's departure, shattering Jeanne's tranquil life. The French army suffered string after string of military defeats, stoking popular discontent and prompting accusations from both nobility and common folk alike. Olivier was among the leaders defending the besieged town of Vannes during the English assault in 1342. When the English army captured Vannes early that year, Olivier and several officers were taken prisoner. In the Middle Ages, abducted nobles were typically released in exchange for ransom. But Olivier was surprised. No ransom was demanded this time. Instead, the English proposed a prisoner swap, offering to exchange Olivier for a captured English aristocrat. According to archives, it was strange that Olivier was the only aristocrat traded and released by the English. This led people to suspect that Olivier was not truly dedicated to defending the city. The charge resulted in the House of Blois seizing Olivier's belongings at the behest of King Philip VI. The conflict between England and France ended with the signing of the Truce of Malestroit on January 19, 1343. The French monarch Philip VI chose to celebrate the end of the war with a grand tournament. The gathering was to include Olivier and 15 other Breton lords, all on French soil. But the nobility was completely unaware that they were walking into a trap. When Olivier arrived on French territory, he found no tournament awaiting him. Instead, French troops encircled him on suspicion of treason. They seized him and took him to Paris for trial. In a Parisian courtroom, these nobles were tried, but the prosecution presented absolutely no proof. It was a sham trial from start to finish. Jeanne was on the verge of collapse when news of Olivier's detention reached Brittany, but she quickly regained her strength and wasted no time plotting her husband's rescue. Appealing through official channels was pointless. After all, the mastermind behind the plot was the King of France himself. Jeanne's only option was to secretly bribe the prison guards. Regrettably, this attempt failed as well. The guards she bribed admitted the attempt, and Olivier was moved to a more secure prison. Soon, the French authorities turned their attention to Jeanne herself. She was summoned to appear before a court in Paris to explain her suspected role in the conspiracy on March 19th. But Jeanne, just as innocent as her husband and never involved in any revolt, was wise enough not to fall into the trap. Olivier and the other Breton nobles accused of conspiring with the King of England against Philip VI were publicly beheaded in Paris on August 2nd, 1343. Their heads were displayed at the city gates of Nantes, Brittany. The people shamed Olivier for his execution and branded him a traitor. His severed head was part of the grisly display. The combination of public humiliation and devastating loss shattered Jeanne. After a period of intense grief, she sent her 2 young sons to Nantes so they could see their father's head mounted on the city gates. In that moment, vengeance ignited in Jeanne's heart with a fiery intensity. Dressed in mourning clothes, she stood above her beloved's head and silently swore that she would make Philip VI pay in blood, that France would pay the highest price for this heinous murder. Jeanne's choice is astounding, especially viewed through the lens of modern times. She raised an army of 400 men using the proceeds from selling nearly all of her possessions: castles, land, and jewelry. At 43 years old, Jeanne stripped down to her underwear, jewelry, and hair, then donned a suit of sturdy armor. She gathered her children, mounted her horse, and rode off into the unknown, abandoning the safe, prosperous life of nobility for the perilous path of a warrior. The French nobility who had mocked Olivier soon learned to fear Jeanne's soldiers. As her forces launched assaults on French-held fortresses, Jeanne made it clear she was seeking vengeance. After each raid, she left behind 1 or 2 survivors, a chilling message to Philip VI. Whispers spread that the elusive and formidable Lioness of Brittany could not be defeated or captured, no matter how hard they tried. French nobles near the Breton border found Jeanne's mercenaries a terrifying threat. Consumed with rage, Philip VI quickly gathered troops to track her down and end her destructive rampage. But Jeanne was the first to break through the ice. By the time Philip VI had recovered, Jeanne had already crossed the ocean to England. There, she made a shrewd decision to join forces with the English, France's bitter enemies. King Edward III of England helped Jeanne purchase 3 warships. By ordering them painted black with scarlet sails, Jeanne christened her fleet My Revenge. As a pirate in the English Channel, Jeanne set out to plunder as many French ships as she could, relying on the nautical skills of her crew. England, a maritime superpower, had built warships that outmatched most others, and Jeanne's fleet stood out sharply. Shortly after setting sail, Jeanne's fleet claimed its first victim, a small vessel flying the French monarch's flag. Seeing her enemy's emblem, the fleur-de-lis, Jeanne's fury ignited. She ordered her crew to strike relentlessly, ruthlessly killing everyone on board. She stuck to her usual pattern of rescuing a handful of French sailors, placing them on a tiny raft near the French coast, and ordering them to return home to inform the king about their fellow soldiers who had been slaughtered. Jeanne de Clisson's reign of terror truly began at this point. To French sailors, the Lioness of Brittany was an abomination. To ensure no Frenchmen escaped, she chased any ship flying the French flag, even if it meant intercepting vessels bearing other flags. If any French were found aboard, a bloodbath ensued. Because the French aristocracy had betrayed her family and murdered her husband, Jeanne was determined to personally kill any French nobleman she encountered. To some extent, this view was not entirely unfounded. When the 100 Years' War erupted in 1346 between France and England, Jeanne seized the opportunity to serve as a supply ship for Edward III's fleet and to protect the coast from French naval flanking attempts. Though Jeanne may not have succeeded in harming Philip VI or the House of Blois directly, she created significant difficulties for France by disrupting French maritime trade. Many admired her. Some viewed her as a fierce adversary. Perhaps most saw her somewhere in between. One thing was certain: Jeanne de Clisson cared little for the opinions of others. In the end, the French managed to bring down Jeanne's warship, killing her youngest son. Nevertheless, Jeanne escaped on a makeshift raft with her eldest son. After drifting at sea for 5 days, they were rescued by the English. Jeanne regrouped in England after her near-death experience and continued her piracy career for another 13 years. During that time, Jeanne began to heal from her heartbreak. She met Sir Walter Bentley, an honorable English naval commander 10 years her junior. Though Jeanne was 50 years old, her charisma captivated Walter, and they married in 1356. As the Hundred Years' War progressed, the French could no longer pursue Jeanne. At last she returned to Brittany, her homeland. Jeanne and Walter settled in Hennebont Castle, a small port town on the Breton coast. The Lioness of Brittany laid her eyes to rest in 1359, closing the chapter on nearly 20 years of battle.